Happy Mother's Day. I know we said it a moment ago, but it's just a beautiful day, and we're very thankful for moms. Dads, you'll get your day in the future, but we're very thankful. And today, we're going to continue a study in the book of Romans. So, for those of you who are visiting with us today, or who have not been following along in our study, we're in the book of Romans right now. We're focusing on Romans chapters 12 and 13, and the thought is that we're looking back to the cross. And as we're looking back to the cross, we're experiencing flashbacks, moments where Jesus said something, did something in that moment of the Passion Week that we're looking at from Paul's perspective today. So that's kind of been the mentality that we've been in. We've been following that through Romans chapter 12. And as you start in Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, we're first told that we are to be a sacrifice, living holy and acceptable to God. And that this is supposed to be a mindset that we create within us, or that the Spirit creates within us. Because if you move then to verse 2 of chapter 12, it says, "Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So we've been analyzing and thinking, what is it like to live life with the mind of Christ? And so as part of our study together, we've been flashing back to the cross, been looking back at what Jesus did. And so today is no exception to that. And so as we enter into our text today, we're going to be in Romans chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 17 today, and we're going to move through verse 21. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn over there. But before we throw our Bible verse up on the screen, I want to share with you a picture. Now, ladies, please control yourself. I know that this is either a cute moment or you're going to flock me because you're just interested. But let's just look at that stud for a moment, shall we? Thank you. Whoever did that, I don't know. Thank you, Patty Melt. I appreciate it. As I was looking at this text, the particular text for today, I thought about a time when I was younger. My uncle, he was a prepper before prepping was cool. And if you know what a prepper is, then you're part of that group. If you don't know what a prepper is, then he was a prepper before prepping was cool. Like, he had the big radio antenna slapped to the side of the house because the CB radio was that way. When the government shuts the phones down, you could still talk. That was him. But he was also the type that said, no, you've got to be prepared to defend yourself. You've got to be the one who's going to stand up, and when things get rough, you've got to be prepared to do it. And so as a little kid, he said, Josh, you got to be prepared to beat up the people whenever they come knocking. He said, so we're going to put you in karate. Now, for those of you who don't know me well, I do really good to harm a fly. I do have a bug zapper at home that is the most amazing thing to watch. I love it. It's like I get vindictive on a fly. But beyond that, I'm generally the type that I'm like I caught a spider the other day in my house. Don't tell my wife. Even though she's watching, she now knows. I caught a spider in the house, and I carried it outside, and I said, go back to where you belong. You're in my territory, but I'm not going to kill it. It was a little spider. It was cute. So that's my personality. And then my uncle's like, okay, we're going to put you into karate classes. So there's Josh. Look at that guy. Isn't he good looking? In dressed up for, in my karate uniform, and I was learning karate, and that was this idea that when something bad happened to me, I would be prepared to stand up and fight for my place. I'm glad that today's text doesn't fall on Father's Day, because typically if something bad happens to our sons or to our daughters, the father's reaction is, well, why don't we teach you how to punch? Let's teach you how to fight, because this is the way you're going to stand up for your own. Mamas probably do that some. But mamas are probably also the ones that are a little more loving and a little more tender and sensitive. And they say, well, let's try and solve this by love instead of being a fighter. And that's really kind of our idea that comes from Romans chapter 12 today, is how much of our life is spent in the pursuit of fighting or in the pursuit of love. Now, all along, for those of you who are, I'm going to catch you up real quick, those who have not been here, when we were in verse 9 and 10 of Romans chapter 12, I told us, and I placed this umbrella. I said this was our umbrella. All of this chapter is now going to be on the umbrella of God's love and the reality of our love for other people. So when we look, and we get that in verse 9, actually. Verse 9 says, let love be genuine. So we then placed everything we're going to talk about under the umbrella of love. This text is no different. This text goes back to being a sacrifice, where it is no longer about you living. It's no longer about me. It's about a sacrifice for God. And all of this is placed under the umbrella of love. Let's read our text, shall we? Romans chapter 13, or chapter 12, verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it's written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. And by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be conformed, or do not be overcome by evil, my apologies, but overcome evil with good. Let's work our way through this text. And as we work our way through these verses, I hope maybe we can find some applications or something that could speak to our life today. And as we go back to verse 17, he starts off with, it says, repay no one evil for evil. Why is it that if someone wrongs me, I feel the need to fight? Am I the only one that does that? You know, when something happens, and I'll use this example. The other day, I was getting onto 65, heading north, and as I was getting onto 65, some jerk decided that he would speed past me, get in my lane, slow down, and jump over, and he was just being a punk. And what's my reaction? Honk the horn, swerve a little bit, 1 second, Matt, and I'll get you. Swerve a little bit. We want to follow him. I want to write down his license plate number so that I can try and report it. I'm gonna do whatever I can to get even with that guy. Why is it that we have this desire when someone does something wrong to us? And let's not say it's road rage for a second. Let's back it up. Let's say that it is someone at work who is, they're not trying to be snarky, but have you ever known times when someone was do y'all know what snarky means? Okay, good. It's not just a made up word. I make those up sometimes. But they're being snarky with you, and you're like, I don't deserve this. And what's our reaction in times when someone cuts us off in traffic, when someone's being snarky with us, when it seems that our patience is thin? What do we naturally tend to do? I want to give it right back to them. You know what? You're going to tell me off. Let me tell you off. You're going to cut me off. Well, I'm going to ride your bumper. I'm going to lay on the horn, and I'm going to get an air horn installed so the next time I see you, I can just pull that, and you're going to know you mess with the wrong person. Matt said something, though, that is awful hard to do. Well, I know you were joking, but let's be honest. How many of us, our first reaction, don't raise your hands because I don't need anyone lying. How many of us, our first reaction when the person cuts us off, when something goes like that, is our first reaction to say, Lord, that person must be in a hurry to get somewhere today. Maybe they're on their way to the hospital, Lord. Be with them for a second. How many of us, that's our first reaction? Zero. Okay, that's why I said I don't want anyone raising their hands. We don't need any liars today. But as I look at this reality, when something bad happens to us, and it could be road rage, it could be the snarky employee. Oh boy, I'm going to step on my toes for a second. My kids, I love them. But they can wear on my nerves, can't they? Yes, they can wear on my nerves. Or I could go down the list of situations where things have occurred, where someone has been wrong to me. I've been very blessed that I've never had to fight anybody in my entire life. Now, some of you are saying, oh man, we had brawls every week. I've never had to fight anybody. I guess because of my karate skills, that's why. Yeah, I was threatening anyways. But as I think about this reality, we are taught, our society teaches us that when things don't go our way, when things are wrong, when they're perceived as wrong or when they are wrong, we are taught to fight back, to get what was rightfully ours, and to not be in some way oppressed or hurt. And what is it that Paul says here? He says, do not repay evil for evil. When someone does something wrong to you, Paul is telling you, don't do wrong back. Boy, I don't know about you, but that is against human nature. That is against what we feel we should do. I like to blare on that horn when I get that chance. Boy, I just feel better. I don't even know. It doesn't do any good, but it just feels good to lay on that horn, don't it? It just feels good when someone has been wrong to me, for me to get quick back with them and to try and throw whatever they threw at me to throw back into their face. I just want to do that. And then Paul comes in and he says, you do not repay evil for evil. And then he throws this line in, and this is a troubling line. I'll tell you why it's troubling though. He says, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. That's troubling. You know why it's troubling? Because what Paul is saying is, he says, what I do in reaction to someone else's meanness to me is a direct result of what you will all think. Now, does that mean that we don't, is Paul saying that I should be worried about what everybody else thinks? No. If you get that out of the point, you've gone too far. But what Paul is saying is, he says, my reaction as a Christian to wrongs that happen in this world is judged by what everyone else sees. So if I respond to wrongs in this world by being wrong myself, what does everyone else think? I'm not different than anybody else. I'm living the exact same life that everyone else is living, and they're going to look at me without any sort of speculation to think that there's something different about me. I fit in. But what Paul says, and what's equally troubling, is he says, give thought to, and that phrase, give thought to, says you should think about this before it actually happens. I tell teenagers, you cannot think about what you're going to do in the backseat of a car when you're in the backseat of a car. If you've never heard that phrase before, there you go. You have to know what you're going to do in the backseat of a car before you get in the backseat of the car. Or you actually should never be in the backseat of the car, period. But that's what you got to know. You've got to know full well what your lines are before you're ever in those situations. Because if you don't know your lines before you're in the situation, boy, the situation will tell you where your terms are. You have to set the boundary before you're in that situation. What Paul is saying, he says, give thought, think about what your reaction is going to be the next time someone's mean to you. The next time someone is going to be vindictive towards you. The next time someone's just flat awful towards you. Think about what your reaction is going to be now when you're in a good place. Man, right now, no one's being mean to me. Boy, some of y'all all have smiles on your faces. You all look nice. Like no one's being mean right now. It's far easier in a moment right now to think, what should I do when someone is mean to me? It's easier for me to process, what should I do when someone's going to be mean to me right now? With the thought being, this is Paul's point, with the thought being, when that time comes, I'm prepared to give an answer. So when someone swerves in traffic and they're just laying their finger up in the window for me to see, I can have a response that is a far better response than what would be if I didn't think about it ahead of time. Do not repay evil for evil, but give thought to do what's honorable in the sight of all. And I call verse 18 the emergency escape clause to niceness. If I look at verse 18, I'm calling it the emergency escape clause to niceness. If possible. What does that mean? Maybe. If you can. That's why I call it, this is your escape clause. If possible. So far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Why would Paul say that? Aren't there times where we have to stand? Now, this is the part that gets troubling. We kind of have to think about this stuff before we're in the moment. If someone cuts me off on Gene Snyder, what should my reaction? Let's all think together. If someone cuts me off on Gene Snyder and lays their finger up on their window so I can see it real pretty, what should my reaction be right now? I'm with a whole bunch of church folks, okay? Good people. And if you're not an active member of a church, you're here to support someone who is, so you're probably a good person. What would a good person do in those situations? You'd gently wave, and then you'd pray, as Matt said. You'd say, you know what, Lord, they are on their way to the hospital. They're on their way to somewhere that they need your protection because obviously something's going on in their life. Okay, now that we've all established that that's what we should do, the next time that occurs, the next time the coworker says something mean to you, you should say, maybe they didn't sleep good last night. Maybe they were up with a kid. Maybe they got something going. Maybe their mama's home and she's not feeling well too. But he says in verse 18, as far as it's possible with you, live peaceably. Now, were there times in Jesus' life that he didn't live peaceably? Boy, I don't really call a whip in the church house, whipping out people who are trying to sell and buy, peaceable. Would you consider it peaceable if a guy came walking in here with a whip and started whipping everyone? We wouldn't call that peaceable. I wouldn't think it's peaceable when Jesus looks to the Sadducees and the Pharisees and said, you're just a brood of vipers. But what's the difference? What gives Jesus the right to act that way in those moments? Were people wronging him? It's in a roundabout way, kind of, but righteous indignation. There is a place to stand for truth. When truth is the point that's to be stood for, that's when you're called to stand. And what Jesus was looking at in those situations that I just referenced, he's looking at a people who are going against God, and they're saying that they're belittling God in their actions. And Jesus says that's not right. Truth stands for truth. Truth stands for God. But when it comes to hurting Paul, when it came to hurting Jesus, if we're going to look back to the cross and we look at a crowd that's hurting Jesus, what was Jesus' reaction? His prayer on the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Jesus, they're probably headed to the hospital right now. Jesus prayed when he's on the cross, God, these folks don't know what they're doing. They don't grasp, they don't comprehend the gravity of this situation. They are so caught up in mob mentality. They are so caught up in what Satan has been feeding them that they don't know. And God, I just ask that whatever wrong is on their part, you forgive them. That's what Jesus prayed in that moment. Boy, and if I'm supposed to be living like Jesus, if that's my challenge, when I agreed to become a Christian, when I said I want to die to myself and I want to live for Christ, when I made that confession, I said, God, I want you to live in my heart. I want your words to be mine, your actions to be mine. And I said, when someone cuts me off, It's no longer about what I want. It's looking out for what other people need. So when I come to this verse, there is a time to stand. But I hate to break it to you. The time that we want to stand is not the time that Paul's telling us to stand. The time that I want to stand is the time when someone hurts me, not when someone hurts God. Oh, when someone hurts God, I tend to say, oh, you know what? He's big enough, he can handle it, which is true. We oftentimes get real offended when people hurt us. Verse 19. Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God. Paul looks back at what Jesus teaches here, and this is in Luke chapter 6 and Matthew chapter 5. Paul is looking back to what Jesus has taught, and he's quoting him. Jesus says these exact same phrases in the Sermon on the Mount. And as Paul is looking to those moments, and he says, don't avenge yourself, but leave it for the wrath of God. Do you think Paul's trying to comfort Christians by saying God's going to get it right someday? I don't know if that's necessarily Paul's point, and let me tell you why. If you go to Revelation, in Revelation, you'll see that there's the throne of God, and it says that there are spirits, there are martyrs coming up out of the throne, and they're saying, God, when will we be avenged? And they're given a white cloak and told to wait a little while longer. I don't know how long they've been there in Rome. And I've been saying Romans. I meant Revelation. Revelation, sorry. That's where the throne's at, where they're coming out of the altar. I don't know how long they've been asking God, when will you avenge us? But I do know this. He says, wait a little while longer and I'll make it right. You know, the problem whenever I get angry is that my anger comes from one side. If someone cuts me, if someone is mean to me, I tend to have the reaction as a response because it's all me. I only know my perspective. If someone has been mean to me, I only know what's going on in my mind. And your meanness to me may have not actually been mean. How many of you, and you can raise your hands for this, have said you were completely innocent, like there was genuine innocence on your part, but someone else took what you said wrong and they got all upset? That ever happen, or am I the only one that's ever done that? Yeah, it happened. I mean, thank you. There's a few of you that are honest now. You know, as we think about this, there are times in our life when we're being genuine, we're being honest, but other people perceive it wrong. Why does that happen? Different perspectives. We all see things differently. If I'm on the north side of an intersection when a car wreck happens, I'm going to say the car was coming from my left. But for someone on the south side of the intersection, which direction was the car coming from? They're right. We see things differently. And so based upon where we're at in life, based upon our perception, all of these things factor in. This day is a wonderful example of that. Mother's Day and Father's Day are some great examples because there are some mothers who really struggle with Mother's Day. And there's some children who really struggle with Mother's Day. There are some some fathers and children who struggle with Father's Day because those days have different perspectives for those people. And so we all come to these things with perspective. And what Paul is saying in verses 19 and 20 is he says, don't bring your vengeance. Don't bring your, if you want something, God's going to take care of it, but don't bring your vengeance because you don't understand what they're going through. You don't know what life's like for them. You haven't walked in their shoes. I don't know why someone would be an idiot some days of the week, but I know there are days where I'm an idiot. And I know that there are days I depend on this thing called grace from other people. I depend on this thing called mercy from other people. That's all that Romans 1 through 11 is talking about. Because of the greatness of our God and the grace that He has shown towards us, the mercy that He has shown towards us, I live in a place with my relationship to God, in a place of mercy and grace. And there are days that I need your mercy. I need your grace. Because there are days I wake up on the wrong side of the bed. There are days that bad things happen and I don't emotionally understand how to deal with it yet. That my mind is still comprehending. And so what Paul is saying, verses 19 and 20, live in the attitude of grace. Live in the attitude of mercy. If you want some examples, we could jump back right now to verse 1 and 2 of our chapter. This is Romans 12, 1 and 2. To be a living sacrifice. What that means is that I'm going to kill the part of me that wants to get vengeful, the part of me that wants to make it even, the part of me that wants to make it right. And oh, by the way, have you ever tried to make it right and afterwards you found out that it didn't really fix the problem? If someone hurt me and I got back at them, it never solved my pain. Not once. I may have felt good because they paid, but then I'm still at the hurt. And so what Paul says, he says, you got to kill yourself. You got to kill the pride, the ego, the arrogance, all the stuff that dwells within you. You've got to get rid of that. That's verse 1. Because you're going to be living holy and acceptable to God. And then you got to change your mind. You got to change your thinking. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And so when it comes to this idea of vengeance as God's, he says, live within grace, live within mercy, because God's the one who will take care of it. Matter of fact, this is the hard part. This is the challenge. If your enemy's hungry, what do you do? If your enemy's thirsty, what do you do? Well, I can feel the turmoil within me thinking, how does a person do that? What do you do if someone kills your family member? Cold-blooded murder. How do you look at that person who did it and say, I love you still. God loves you still. I don't have a personal way to tell you that. I can look to what Paul says, and I can know that Scripture says, and if I'm going to flash back to the cross for a minute, I know what Jesus said. But when life gets into those situations, I can only lean on what we're told. And here's the thing that's probably most daunting. I took us to a very, we left the idea of someone cutting me off in the intersection, and we went to a very serious part of life when someone truly wrongs me. But if I go to Romans chapter 5 for a moment, Romans chapter 5, Paul says, God shows his love for us. This is 5 verse 8. God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And then if you jump to verse 9, for if while we were enemies, being a sinner is the same as being an enemy of God. And what was God's reaction as we were enemies of his? While we were sinners, while we were enemies, Christ died so that we could be reconciled. Friends, I don't fully understand in the gravity and the deepest parts of life how you can be kind to someone. I can't give you a personal example of how you do that. But what I do know is this. When God looked at humanity in our sin and in our enemy state, he looked at humanity and he said, I need to love them. I need to love them in a way that brings them back to me. I need to love them in a way that reconciles us together, that makes us right. And in so doing, he gave it all in Jesus on the cross. so that we could be made right. Friends, kindness towards our enemies is not just for kindness' sake. Kindness towards the people who are mean and vindictive towards us is so they will see the glory of our God and that they may praise Him too. What we do in this life is about reconciling people to Jesus. It's about bringing them closer to who He is. And if I'm just like the world, if I hit back when you hit me, if I cuss back when you cuss me, if I do the things that the world does, I am no different. But if I do live differently, if I am different, then when the world is mean, when the world is unkind, the world can look and they can say, that person is different. And I can be doing all of this for the glory of God. So as we conclude out in Romans chapter 13, here's my challenge for you. And I want you to if you need to close your eyes. If you don't worry about it. But I want you to think of one person who has brought you hurt and pain in this life. I want you to write their name on a piece of paper if you have a pen. And if you don't, then write it on your heart. Maybe put a note in your phone. But I want you to think of one person. I want you to write their name down. And then what I want you to do is I want you to pray for them tonight. I want you to pray for God to do good things for them. I want you to maybe even write them a card, drop them a note yourself. I want you to keep praying for that person. Because the greatest thing that we can do is wish goodness on people who've hurt us. Isn't that what a lot of our mamas would want us to do too? As I think about what Jesus did on the cross, that drives it home even more. Because I didn't deserve the grace that He's given to me. I didn't deserve this goodness. But He looked to me and He said, the same as He looked to you, and He said, I love you, and I will do this so that you can be with God again. Friends, we're all struggling in this department. But our challenge, our goal, is to be good to our neighbors, even when they're not so good to us. So this morning, your challenge, write a person's name down and begin praying for them. Pray that God would be good to them, that God would show them mercy and grace, and that God would speak in whatever ways possible that they could know Him. And if that person has already left us, write them a note. Write them a note and pray to God still. Let's have a prayer. And after our prayer, the invitation will be open. This is a challenge because this sermon is a challenge because most of us have earthly tendencies within us. We have human tendencies. And in a way, we're asking, or the Bible is asking us to do something that's not human. It's asking us to enter into something that only God can do within us. These are all spiritual gifts. But the idea of peace and being a peacemaker is a spiritual gift that God can give. And maybe that needs to be your prayer too. So let's have a prayer. And after our prayer, we'll stand with Jim and sing. Father, as we come to you now, we realize that you are the ultimate peacemaker. When we were enemies, when we were devilish, when we were wrong, you loved us, you cared for us, and you sent your Son for us. Father, in this time, as we think about the jerks that live in our life, as we think about the meanness that this world can have within it, as we think about all of the just wrong that exists within this world, Help us to love with a love that wants to bring people to you. Help us to love with a forgiveness that wants people to know you. And Father, be with us to live a life that models the grace and the mercy that you have shown towards us. Oh, Father, I'm so thankful personally for the grace that you've shown towards me. But Father, I'm thankful for the grace you've shown towards each one of us, and the grace I know that you'll continue to show. So, Father, be with us as we strive to bless the people who have been mean to us, as we strive to pray for the people who want our demise, who probably hate us. And Father, may your Spirit be what changes us. These things we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. Let's stand and sing.